Well, good afternoon on this very cloudy day in not so sunny southwest Scotland. This wasn't a video I was going to do, but let's just say that time and unforeseen occurrences has befall us all, and so that came to pass this morning. As you're probably aware, there was quite an important watchtower which was made uncomfortable reading and discussion, I'm sure, with Kingdom Halls all over the world that past weekend. And I wasn't going to comment about that particular watchtower at all. But what happened was I went into Anna this morning, and lo and behold, turned around the corner and there were the Carters. And it's the same two Carters that I bumped into a couple of weeks ago. The same two guys that I met a couple of weeks ago, who I had a talk about how ridiculous the warning method was with the cart. And I walked past them and I just I just went, "Hello boys," and they recognised me straight away. And I just said, "Well, that watchtower on Sunday, that must have made uncomfortable reading." And they went, oh yeah, do you still get the watchtower?" I says, no, I don't get the watchtower. I said, "But obviously it's available online." And I only knew the contents of the watchtower purely because I watched Lloyd's video, whereupon he goes through it from paragraph to paragraph, and I listened to it as I was doing some painting and talking about it. So I haven't read it, I just listened to it. But subsequently I've seen videos of people in the Kingdom Hall after that watchtower, during the watchtower being discussed, which I'll come back to. So anyway, I was speaking to them and I said, "Well, that must have made it uncomfortable reading." They said, "Oh yes it was, unfortunately it is it's a worldwide epidemic." And he is right, because it isn't just rife with Jehovah's Witnesses, it's just they've particularly dealt very poorly with it. And it has been going for a long time. Unfortunately, they covered it up the extent of how bad it was in their own organisation. And I said to him, I said, "Look," I said to him, I says, "Yes," I says, "what I took," I says, it's ironic," I says, "because when I used to do what you're doing now, it was the witnesses used to alert how bad it was in the Catholic Church, and how the Catholic Church would then, as soon as they found out that there was somebody guilty of it, a priest, they'd just move him on to another district, and where then the priest would then abuse other people." I said, we used to then say to people on the doors, "Well, that proves, that God isn't with them, and we don't do that sort of thing." Well, and I said to him, I says, "Well, in fact," I says, "unfortunately, those sort of things were occurring with Jehovah's Witnesses, and they were covering it up. They've been covering up for decades, but it's only now coming out." And I said to him, I says, "There's one bit in the," I said to them, I says, "There's one bit in the watch I didn't really like." I says, "It was the point in it where they said, in the case of, when it comes to light, that the elders will endeavour to alert local authorities." And I says, that didn't sit well with me at our And they said, "Oh," he says, "well, no," he says, "Our advice is that we would say to the person, 'Do you want to contact the police?' And then if they say yes, they can do that." But at the end of the day let's think about it. If it is a child, or even if it's not a child and somebody who's, really disturbed, at the end of the day, they need to see a professional. And especially if that person is still knocking around, the police needs to be alerted because he's committed a crime. So yeah, it didn't sit too well with me, that one. And I gave them the examples of, I said to him, well, the first time I heard that this was a problem was when I'd moved out to Rutherglen congregation, and there was somebody who'd moved into Rutherglen congregation. I think I was down here at the time. Who all of a sudden, he just appeared, him and his wife, I believe, and nobody knew why he appeared or what was going on. And what had happened was, this particular person was featured in a documentary on the BBC this particular guy. And what he'd done was, I don't know the whole story, but apparently he'd abused 2 of his own children. And then the case was going through, and it was a big cover-up, and the elders were doing the old chestnut with the daughter, saying, reproach Jehovah's name, leave it with Jehovah, you know, and just basically putting her back in danger by saying, no, you've got to go and live with, you shouldn't move out the parental home, that sort of thing, not even involving the police, until eventually, I think the eldest daughter went to the police because she was worried for a wee sister. And then, of course, the shit hit the fan, and then, of course, they moved out the area, and, of course, they moved then to Rutherglen congregation. And the court case was going through, and only when the programme all of a sudden appeared on the TV did the people in Rutherglen realise who this guy really was. Went, hold on a second, that's that guy there. So unbeknownst to them, you know, they were sitting in a congregation with a paedophile, and they didn't know this. And of course, he could have been, you know, with their own children, sit in front of him, behind him, on the same row. This sort of thing, they weren't made aware. And then there was a guy who wasn't a witness, but his wife took their children to the meetings, and he went absolutely ballistic when he realised that his children were in the same building as not a convicted, as a paedophile when the court case was going through. And this guy hadn't even been disfellowshipped. He hadn't even been disfellowshipped. And I said to him, I says, the funny thing is he got found guilty, as you do. I said, but it was only then that they decided to disfellowship him. And then the guy said to me, the older guy said to me, well, the reason why that was, I thought, wait for it, here we go. He says, because we had to wait, they had to wait upon the result of the court case before they decided what to do with them. And of course it was easy at that point, because then as soon as it became aware that he had been found guilty by the law, that then they would disfellowship him. So then if it ever came up within the area, they would say, oh yeah, he's no longer a Jehovah's Witness, we've disfellowshipped him. Now I said to him, I says, well, hold on a second. I says, irrespective of whether, you know, he was found guilty by the law, I says, we know that sometimes the law finds people guilty when they're not guilty, and also finds people innocent when they're not innocent. I said, irrespective of how that case trumble on, I says, at the end of the day I says, the elders should have been able to come to their own decision-making process of, you know, there's, you know, this has happened, and clearly it's probably not a made-up story. They've had to move out, and you know, he doesn't show repentance. He's not repentant, or he is repentant. I said, so therefore, it says that you know, he should have been disfellowshipped a long time ago. But it was just to make it, the reason they did that is for that very reason that I said, because it's a lot easier to actually say, oh, he's no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't have to worry about him. He's been dealt with, he's been disfellowshipped. When in fact, he was still sitting in the Kingdom Hall in Rutherglen, you know, for ages, until finally, you know, the court case was finally finished, and when I think he did get jailed. Now, I said to the younger guy, I said to him, who seems a little bit more down to earth, I said to him, I says, well, I says, hold on a second. I says, for instance, I said, it's all about forgiveness. It's all about love. It's all about forgiving your brother. It's all about forgiving your brother. And he says, yeah, well, it's up to the individual to decide whether they want to forgive that person or not. I says, yes, but the end of the day is, if you've been abused by somebody in the congregation, and then you still have to go into the same Kingdom Hall as this person and show forgiveness to this person, you know, I said, that is wrong. I says, that is wrong. I said to him, I says, how would you feel if, it's not funny, this, I don't know why I'm laughing. I says, how would you feel, for instance, if it's your daughter that had been abused by somebody in the Kingdom Hall? I says, how would you feel when they walked into the Kingdom Hall next and you had to extend love and forgiveness? He said, what would you want to do that? He says, and he was brutally honest and said, no, he says, I'd actually want to kill them. So maybe this guy isn't an elder after all, because he totally went to what naturally we would feel. He actually said, instead of wanting to say, well, brother, and forgiveness and all that nonsense, he just say, look, you're a beast here, and I really want to kill you, which is the obvious normal response that anybody would want to do when they come face to face with somebody who has abused their daughter or their son. And he then went on to say to me, and it was shocking, he says, for instance, I was going, oh, here we go. He says, not this congregation, so not in Annan, but in another congregation I was in, there was an elder. And I says, okay. He says, there was an elder there. And he was an elder there. We used to go on the work, he used to do, when they were obviously just pioneering. He says, I'd spend 5 hours with him. He says, and then we used to go out for meals and that. He says, and all of a sudden, he got removed and got jailed for watching child pornography online. And he just said, so you really don't know what's going on in people's houses. And I just thought, my God, even this guy has got his own personal example of what's actually going down. So I said to them, look, clearly that watchtower came out to try and deal with the amount of cases which are getting publicised all over the internet in relation to cover up by the governing body and by the organisation for people who were being abused for years and years and years. And I then even said, this cover up extends to I even mentioned the Royal High Commission case, but a couple of years ago in Australia. I said it even extends to that point, whereupon it was revealed that the Australian branch had a list of over 1,000 members who had committed child abuse, children who were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they never pass any of those names on to the police or the authorities, so these people could be brought to book. And I says even the governing body, Jeffrey Jackson, had to give evidence. And I says it was shown at that point that Jehovah's Witnesses in trying to protect children were really, really poor. And I really left it at that. I just said to him, I just look at that, and it makes me really sad that while we were picking holes in other religions to prove ours was right, we were Jehovah's Witnesses were just as complicit in covering this up. So that was it. I left it with them. I was going to say something else, but obviously, I just thought I'll just deal with this. I shook their hands, of course, again, and the guy said to me, he says, well, it's nice to see that you're still, looking up the publications, but that's not the reason why I decided to look up any publications at all, for the good reason that he may think. Now, so I left them. And probably if I meet them again, I will be able to talk to them again. And you never know that when you're dealing with Jehovah's Witnesses, that if you deal with people, if you're nice with them, and you talk to them logically, and you don't become emotional or angry or excited or confrontational, I think this is a better way to speak to Jehovah's Witnesses. And a lot of the videos that I've seen appearing on YouTube and on all the Facebook pages that I'm associated with, which are all ex-Jehovah's Witnesses ones, a lot of videos were made by people who went to the meeting last Sunday, were well versed of what the Watchtower was going to be about, because it came out in May. So they knew exactly what they wanted to say. They picked their moment and they said it. They got hold of the microphone, they said their bit, and then they were escorted out. The mic was taken off their hand. Sometimes it was very confrontational, and I saw about 3 of those. And to be honest with you, my view on this is quite simple. I think that's not the right way to go about it, and I completely get why people do this, because I've even thought of doing it myself. Not in relation to that particular issue, but I've thought of going into the Kingdom Hall, sneaking in the back, wearing my suit, and then all of a sudden getting past the mic and just then being a bit vocal about it. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's the best way to go about these things, because unfortunately, once you do that, I don't think you prove anything. I think maybe enforces to yourself that you were right, but you already knew that anyway. I don't think it persuades anybody else who's listening to you speaking in the meeting that, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses all wrong and I'm leaving. I'm leaving with this person right now. And I've seen loads of videos where that guy goes in the hall and goes, the Royal Australian High Commissioner, you know, he did it. He just, you know, eventually, the problem was, you know, everybody started to know who he was, so he got spotted a mile away, and it's just, you know, at the end of the day is, I don't think it proves, it doesn't, there's nothing, it doesn't persuade these people to stop going to the meetings. And the reason why I know that is because when I used to go to the district conventions in Edinburgh, there was always a group of people at Murrayfield and then in Perth who used to be on the periphery of the assembly hall, well, the football ground or rugby ground, and they had their banners or whatever, you know, down with this sort of thing, you know, that sort of stuff, and the, you know, the evil watchtower. And you looked at them and felt sorry for them. You thought they were slightly on the lunatic fringe. And to take it even further, you think, well, firstly, they're apostates. I won't even look in their direction. They're the evil slave gas, and basically, you know, Satan's controlling them. So, you know, you wouldn't even go and speak to them, because, of course, if you get spotted speaking to these guys, you know, an elder in your hall would say, oh, what's going on there? What are you doing speaking to an apostate for? So while I understand why people have done that, and it takes a lot of guts and a lot of bravery to sit in a kingdom hall, to get hold of their mic and become vocal and put your point across, or even just standing up or shouting out, I don't think it's the right thing to do. I have thought about doing it myself, and I just thought, no, what would you prove? You know, eventually what would happen is people would clock onto your face. And that means that if you ever met them when they were out karting, that you wouldn't be able to talk to them. That they wouldn't talk to you because they go, oh, that's that person in the hall who was really outspoken, you know, and they you know, straight away they've clocked who you are. So I don't think it's the way to do this at all. I think a far better way is to just try and reason with people in, you know, as individuals. If you try to demonstrate that in the kingdom hall, I think it just reinforces that you are an apostate, the evil slave class, and it makes them even more insular. That's my thought. I may be wrong. I think it's far better to just try and keep the communication open and just logically speak to people. Maybe you plant that seed. I don't think any seeds are planted at all if you stand in a kingdom hall and become vocal or just hold of the mic and say, I don't think any seeds are planted at all. I think you end up looking like, you know, that you're on the lunatic fringe or an apostate, and that says that it doesn't accomplish anything at all. But I know why people do it. And I admire people who've got the guts to do that, but I don't think that's the way of going about it. To be honest with you, it's not going to change the people there, and it's certainly not going to change the way the governing body is. I think there's a better way of doing it. And that's just trying to talk to people, maybe plant a seed with them, and then let them do their own research online, which is what you hope people are going to do. But anyway, that's my thought on that Watchtower on Sunday. And it wasn't what I wanted to actually talk about. I actually wanted to talk about beards. Oh dear. I'll upload the beard. Jehovah's Witnesses and beards another time. But I thought I'd get this out of the way just to put my 5 pennies worth of my first post Watchtower reaction, speaking to people who are Jehovah's Witnesses and getting their thoughts on it, which was quite interesting. But anyway, have a good day. Bye bye.